Hey, 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 listeners of the Mary Sue. Ashley Barry here, and I am here with a special guest, novelist, writer, all-time awesome person, Marjorie Liu. How are you?
I'm great, and thank you so much for having me on your show.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. It's really amazing. We Marjorie and I were just talking a little bit before we started recording, and hilariously enough, we're from the same area, and I was like, "Oh my God, why didn't we just do like an in-person meeting?" And and you were suggesting like, "Oh, we could have went for coffee or something." I'm like, "Shit."
Well, next time.
Crap.
Next time.
Next time, next time. But so anyway, congratulations on that you just came out with the fifth issue of Monstress, which I am totally obsessed with. And how are you feeling about that? Are you like super pumped?
I always feel tentatively and very gratefully happy that that people enjoy the work and that it seems to be well received and doing well because I've been in this I've been selling books now since 2004, 2000, yeah, since 2004. And I know how it is and especially given the content of the story, I wasn't really sure how it would be received.
Hmm.
So I'm really happy that that people seem to be responding to it the way that they have.
Absolutely. I was telling you before we started recording that I'm very drawn to dark stories and I just started reading The Flowers in the Attic, which is, it's not like a new story by any means, but it's horrifying and it's dark and it's devastating and um so I'm very drawn to those elements, and many people are, as you can tell, are drawn to Monstrous, I think, because of those elements. So I'm a little curious. What are some of your favorite books to read?
Oh gosh.
Big question.
Well, yeah, I mean, because I read so much. What I have near me right now, so let's see, right now on the table beside me, I have Super Mutant Magic Academy by Gillian Tamaki, which
Hmm.
I absolutely love. Like it's so much fun. It's a series of connected vignettes that seem to take place in like a X-Men like, Charles Xavier like academy, except it's magic and it's mutants. And it's hilarious and it's heartbreaking and it's beautiful and I absolutely love it. Um, Something else I also love is Kaoru Mori's A Bride Story,
Hmm.
which is manga, and it's that is about a 20-year-old woman who is sent to marry a 13-year-old boy in Central Asia. It's the story takes place in the turn of the century, and it's not as creepy as it sounds, but it's actually it's and the art, the story is beautiful, but the art is absolutely breathtaking. I mean, I could stare at the pages all day long um, and just never grow tired of their beauty. And what else? I read a lot of poetry, and I found a poet recently who I love. Her name is Naira Wahid,
Hmm.
and she's written two books. One is called Salt, and the other is called, um, oh, I'm going to not pronounce this correctly. Nema? It's Nejma.
Hmm.
I don't know if the J is silent or not, but it's another gorgeous, gorgeous book of poetry. Absolutely beautiful.
I really appreciate that you love poetry because I feel like poetry often gets swept under the rug a lot.
Yeah, it does.
It's amazing what you can do with words and with like, structure with your sentences and everything. It's playful. It can be playful. And
Poetry is so alive.
it is. And
Yeah.
it doesn't get the love I think it really deserves. I'm a writer too, so I understand, in some way, like how wonderful poetry can be and how fun it is to play with your words. So yeah, that really pleases me that good for you for bringing up poetry because I was like, yes, I was doing like a little like fist pump over here.
Well, the thing is, so much can be learned from poetry, and poetry can, both in its economy and in its use of language, um, so much there can be so much story told in just a few lines, And that's the beauty of poetry, where it expresses a tremendous amount in a very small space. And one of the lessons, that's a particularly important lesson to learn when you're writing comics or fiction in general, because even if you're writing a big sprawling novel, it's important to be spare and you know and um, and learn how to be, I guess, wise with your choice of language, to express as much as you can in a small space. And so, I started reading poetry when I was very young, and it's been a huge influence on me.
Yeah, that's awesome. I actually have a well, she's not my professor anymore, but I still call her my professor from undergrad who writes a lot of poetry about she has an autoimmune disease and she writes a lot about illness and dealing with that and being disabled in some way.
Hmm.
And it's just brilliant. I do credit her as one of my favorite poets to date. Um, so with just jumping off of that, I'm a little curious how you ended up writing for Image Comics, and I was wondering if comic book writing differs from novel writing or like, writing poetry.
Yeah, well, so I had been writing for years at Marvel, and I was just finishing up my run on Astonishing X-Men. I think actually my run was more or less done. And I was thinking about doing another project for Marvel, but I was also juggling a novel that I was finishing up, the last in an urban fantasy series, the Hunter Kiss series. And so I was kind of at a crossroads, and I got an email from Eric Stevenson, who's the top guy at Image, just more or less asking if I'd be interested in doing something for Image. And I thought, well, maybe this is just a sign from above. And so, I met with Eric, at San Diego Comic Con, and we talked briefly, and I mentioned I had a couple ideas, nothing concrete, and I more or less just had an open invitation to come up with something, and so I did. But what I did first, before anything else, was reach out to Sana Takeda, because she's an artist, someone who I've wanted to work with again for years, ever since X-23. I just couldn't. She was one of the best. Our working relationship was one of the best I've ever had. She's just brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and incredibly nice, and incredibly giving as an artist and as a collaborator. And so I went to her before anything else and just said, hey, are you up for this? And she said yes. And so basically, with that in mind, I got to work. Um, and so, in some ways, the process was, um, on the surface, the process was easy and straightforward. Behind the scenes, the hard part was actually coming up with the idea and really developing it and fleshing it out. And so that took about a year of incredibly hard work. Um, and then as far as, were you going to ask something, or?
No, no, go ahead.
Okay. And then as
I'm
far as
fascinated.
comic book writing, how that differs from novel writing, it's wow. It's funny because in some ways for me, writing novels is a lot easier because I sit down and I just write. I just sit down, I just write, 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 write. And yes, the burden of the world is entirely on my shoulders. Yes, the burden of interiority and character building and all of that has to come from me, just from the words, which is not easy. I mean, I want to be clear, that's incredibly hard work. But at the same time, I spit out a novel and then I can go back and revise and layer in, and I can take as much time as I want, really. With comic books, it's different because there's a structure.
Hmm.
Uh, it's you have 20 in your typical monthly comic. You have about 20, 22 pages to work with, and each page is broken down to panels. These are beats. These are parts of scenes, and so it's not like you're just writing straight through. You have to figure out, okay, what is essential to the story. What are the parts that absolutely matter most, and where I can do the most. So each panel I think about, okay, well, each panel has to try, I'm trying to do character, I'm trying to do world building, I'm trying to drive along the plot. Like I really do think very carefully about each panel and how much I can pack into each one, how much I can drive the story forward in each panel, because there isn't that much space.
Hmm.
And so to waste a page, um, to waste a moment on something that doesn't really matter, that's frivolous, it's easy to do, but it's not, when you're trying to build something that's kind of complex and big and sprawling, it's not very wise. So um, so writing comics is hard. It's actually very, very hard because the space matters so much, and how one organizes that space requires a lot of thought. And then, of course, once the comic is written, once it's turned into the artist and the artist has finished the art, you can't go back and revise. So that requires also another, another layer of work. It requires a lot of planning, and which is not something that's I'm good at. I'm not really a great outliner. The beautiful thing about writing a novel is you just sit down and do it. Um, that doesn't always work out for the best, but still, it's part of the process. With comics, that's not something I would entirely recommend, even though I myself don't really take my own advice. Um, it's when you're working with someone else, it's you have it's you can't, or it's not that when you're working with someone else, it's when you're on a tight deadline like that, when the work comes out, it's out. Like you can't go back and change it. But the other beautiful thing about writing comics and what I really love is the collaborative process. I dearly, dearly, dearly love the fact that this is a visual medium, and that I'm working with an artist and I'm working with someone else to bring this world to life. And the thing about comics that's wonderful is it's that perfect intersection between prose and film. In
Hmm.
prose you've got interiority, um, in film you've got visuals, you've got movement, um, and in comics that comes together. Like in the comic book medium, you can have both. And so there are stories that I can tell, as I can tell that work fine as novels. And there are stories that no matter how much I try will never be a great novel, but would be a great comic book,
Hmm.
just because of the nature of the story and what the medium can offer. But that's only possible because, we get, we have, we're able to work with artists, with incredibly talented people who can bring these worlds to life.
It's very eye-opening when you say that you kind of have to focus on the points that matter and that the points that kind of propel the story forward.
Mhm.
I usually have to do that in, articles and when I send pitches and whatnot. It's getting to the point in a little under like 1,000 words. Um, and I never actually thought about that with comics. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. It is only like about what, 22, sometimes 30 pages
Mm.
with each issue. And my goodness, yeah, with novels, it would be, you do get a lot of room to kind of, jump around and play and focus on little details. And my goodness, I didn't even think about that. Thank you for
Well,
opening my mind.
well, well, but the thing is, you can hide a lot of filler
Mm,
in a novel. You can pad it. You can't pad a comic
right.
without people noticing. So it really tests. I know it's really tested my skills as a writer.
Mm.
Um, you know, to really to be economical with my words and how I look at plot and character and world.
What I think is really interesting and really cool is I can't imagine what it must feel like to work with an illustrator and see your world and your characters come to life in someone else's, vision, I guess. What was that experience for you like to see Micah,
Oh my
actually,
gosh.
like, were you just like, oh my God?
Well,
Because I would.
I've always been in awe. I mean, I've always absolutely been in awe of the artists I've worked with, and I've had the great fortune of working with some really amazing artists. Whether it was Camo on Dark Wolverine, Calman on MYX, Acuna on Black Widow, Gabriel Hernandez Walta on X-23, like all of these people, oh, Phil Noto on X-23, my gosh, all these people are just amazing, amazing. Um, and and it was always wonderful seeing, the art they would turn in, like seeing the X-Men or, all
Hmm.
these characters brought to life. But it's been a completely different experience with Sana on Monstress because this is a world of our making.
Hmm.
This is our world. And I just remember the first time I saw Sana's character sketch of Micah, and I was just like, I was just speechless because it was perfect. It was as if she had reached into my mind and pulled out this person that I was visualizing and placed her on the page. And in fact, it is, I won't lie, it has been like that throughout the entire process. She and I are really on the same wavelength when it comes to this book. And I don't know how it happened. I don't know how we got that lucky.
That's
But
fantastic.
everything, yeah, it is. And everything that she turns in is like, I can't tell you how excited, how just what a joyous feeling it is to get an email from her that's filled with a sketch or pages from the book because she again, it's the story being brought to life, but being brought to life in a way that is um, that fits it perfectly like a glove. Yeah, it's actually difficult for me to articulate because the feeling is just it's just such a overwhelming feeling of joy, to be able to work with someone of her talent. Um,
She's incredible. The first, the opening page of the first issue of
mm,
Micah standing there, with no clothes, and you can see the mark on her chest. Stunning. Just
mhm,
completely caught my eye, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, what is this story? Who is this girl? Tell me about this girl."
mhm.
Just absolutely, like, it ensnared me the minute I saw it, and then I just devoured it. So, what inspired you to write Monstress, and do you have a favorite character?
Oh man, it's interesting. Monsters was inspired by a lot of things. I've always loved Beauty and the Beast stories, even the ones without a romantic element. Part of the reason that resonates with me, I think, is that I myself am mixed race, and I grew up acutely aware that in another world, in an earlier era, I would never have existed.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that that really stuck with me. The along with that, the idea of someone being judged by the way they look. Um, I always felt like that was acutely unfair. Just a grave injustice. And so, um, you know, but then there were other things too. I grew up I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, and they were always talking about World War II, about surviving the war. Um, I was deeply inspired by my grandmother's experiences in the war, and so there were just a tremendous number of elements that went into this book, and I just didn't know what to do with them. It's one thing to have like a big jumble of ideas in a grab bag, but how do you bring them together and make something that's coherent and actually that matters?
Mhm.
It's I've said it before, but it's one thing, having the desire. What is it? Desire is a very different. The desire to do something is very different from having the idea. And so, I had this huge desire to write something, but that's a very different thing from having an actual idea that
Mhm.
resonates and works. And so it took me a long time to figure that out. What is the idea? Who is the character? And there are times where I still feel like um, I'm figuring that out. Um, Even though I'm working from a place of much deeper knowledge, than before. Um, but as far as my favorite characters go, gosh, um, it's interesting because I love Micah.
Mm.
Micah is a character that really resonates with me on a very, very deep level. But it's interesting. Kippa was a character that I didn't intend for her to be one of the main characters. I didn't realize that she would be so important
Mhm.
until I saw Sana's drawing, until I saw the way Sana, had rendered her. And she was so alive on the page. that I actually revised the book to give her a larger role
Hmm.
in the first issue because I saw those original sketches and I was like, oh my gosh, like this character, there was something so vulnerable and so sweet, but also just this like I don't know, this stubbornness to her as well. And I just, I couldn't not have her around. And she has become one of my favorites, along with Master Wren, the two-tailed cat. To be honest, I
Hmm.
think all the cats. I think every
I
cat
love
that
the
shows up.
cats.
Oh my gosh, I think every cat that shows up in this book is my favorite. Um, it's funny when I originally wrote Master Wren, of course, there were going to be talking cats in this book because cats. Um, but I also I didn't expect cats to have such a large role,
Right.
and things change as you write, especially for me. Like you know, as as I create the story, as I create the characters, sometimes characters just have to take on a life of their own. And that happened with Micah, that happened with Kippa, Ren, and the monster as well.
Hmm.
The monster the monster has um, grown and developed in this story in ways that I didn't expect. Um, and that's not going to change. It's only going to continue.
It's really interesting. When my first read through of the Monstress comics, Kippa was always a boy to me, and I don't know why. Um, Even though it is said, she is, they use she pronouns. In my mind, at first I always envisioned Kippa as a male, which is really interesting. And I
That
think
is interesting.
yeah, and or like a little boy. And it was funny. Like I reread it again, and I was like, oh, it's a girl. And I was like, it's weird that I missed that the first time around, and like my brain just took over and was like, no, this is a little boy. Um, and I love Kippa, and Kippa is adorable, of course, and you know, um, scared, and I love when she hugs her tail when she is afraid. But you're right, there is this stubbornness to her, and there's this fire to her. She fights back, and
Yes.
that is that is so amazing and strong. And I do love Kippa, and I love the I like at the end of each comics when you get a lesson from Professor Tam Tam. That is just amazing because it adds a lot of context to the story that like you couldn't, I'm being given a history lesson. And I love the little the little illustrations that go with it. Like my favorite one is when they're dipping the rats in the chocolate chocolate covered rats or mice or whatever they're eating. Um, I love that. That's really fun. The cats remind me of I've started reading Lovecraft this year, and the cats remind me of the cats of Ulthar, where everybody the cats are you know just worshipped, and they're these beautiful smart creatures. And and I know they're not always worshipped in your world. Like they're kind of looked at as oh, I don't know if I trust you. But the cats actually are like these keepers of you know these, I don't know, like the history of the world. And they know a lot of things. They're just very like, they have this innate knowledge that I love. And they're cats. Like you said, they're cats, and it's wonderful. They
That's
also
fun.
they kept making me think of the Japanese myth. Oh my goodness, what are they called? They're creatures. They're foxes with a lot of tails.
The kitsune.
Yes, yes, yes. And but it kind of resembled that in some way, where like, the more tails they have, maybe like the older they are. And I think that's what a kitsune is as well, is, the more tails they have, it's like, I think it's like it marks every 100 years or something like that.
Well, and
Um,
there are cat yokai as well.
mhm.
And so the cats in this book are also based off of the Japanese cat yokai, the neko.
Oh, yes,
And
yeah.
so the neko in Japanese mythology, they can talk to ghosts, they dance, they raise the dead. And so I wanted to bring that to this book in a very real way.
Mm. Cats are cool, aren't they?
Yes, yes, they are.
So the next question I have, so I'm really intrigued by the monster that is
Mm.
inside Micah. And um, I like that. I like your take on this monster, because I like that Micah kind of tells it to go fuck itself a couple of
Yes,
times.
yes.
And it kind of like, when you think of monsters, they're these scary things, and that you think that they have all this control, and that, you're the victim. And you kind of flip it with this, where Micah is kind of telling the monster where to go, and Micah's like, "No, you're inside my body. This is my body, and I control it, not you." And this is kind of a big question. It's a little vague, and you can tell me to buzz off if you want to.
Mhm.
Do you think we all have monsters residing within us?
I do. I mean, I think that all one has to do is look at the world and see that people are capable of incredible darkness.
Hmm.
And, call that a monster, call that, whatever you want, but we all have a dark side. And and I think that uh, in this case, um, Micah would have had a dark side even without having an actual monster inside of her,
Hmm.
just based off of the kind of life that she's had and the trauma that she's endured. And she herself is she's really messed up. Like, this is a messed up kid.
Hmm.
She didn't start out messed up. She started out as a kid who was bright, cheerful, loving, and then she went through hell, and she came out the other side damaged. And so this is a damaged kid who has a monster living inside of her. And what's interesting about that dynamic is, how does being damaged actually perhaps help her?
Hmm.
Like, is it's not necessarily a weakness in this regard, but it actually may be an asset. And the monster too is not, what it seems. I mean, yes, it is, it has deep hungers. It's not particularly sympathetic to humans, but it too has a history, and it too is damaged. And so these are both very damaged individuals forced to cohabitate in a very, very small space, aka their
Very
body and
small.
mind. And what happens? What happens when you have no choice to but to cooperate, um, you know, with someone when both of you don't want to be there, both of you are angry and bitter and resentful, and have your own shit that you're trying to take care of.
Hmm.
Like, what is that? What kind of relationship can form? What kind of friendship? And so, really, it's funny because, and one thing that's going to be clear as the story continues is that the big the big relationship of this book is between Micah and this monster. We've got, of course, there are all these other central important relationships of Kippa and Master Ren, but really at the end of the day, this comes down to Micah and what's happening inside her with this creature, and how the two of them resolve this and perhaps heal each other is a very important part of the book.
It's like being trapped with a roommate you really don't like,
Yes,
being trapped in a room or
yes,
chained to each other or
yes.
something.
Hmm.
Um, do you have any advice for writers?
Read. I got to say, well, I know it may seem like a cop out, but for
Hmm.
me, that's how I learned how to write.
Hmm.
Just read constantly, read everything. Don't just read comics, read novels, read newspapers, read The Economist, read The New Yorker, read Discovery Magazine. Like, I don't care what it takes, just read everything,
Hmm.
because words are, if you don't read, you can't learn how to write
Right.
without actually um, bringing words into your mind, like just a constant stream of words and story, and learning from those. And even if you're not consciously learning, just the fact that you're always just ingesting story, always with a sort of a book on your mind, a book on your hand. That's that's the best. That's the best teacher of all. That and doing it, that
Hmm.
and actually writing. Because let me tell you, if you can't finish what you write, it doesn't matter how much you want to be a writer. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
it's not going to happen. You have to be able to finish what you do. Um, that was the best piece of advice someone ever gave me, which is, okay, yeah, you want to be a writer? Well, finish writing your novel, and then we'll talk.
Right.
But until you finish actually doing it, then it's just a dream. It's a great dream, but it may always be a dream, even if you finish your work.
Hmm.
But until you actually do that, um, you can't even start. Like there's just don't just focus on the basics. Read, write, and then go out and live.
Hmm.
You've got to go out and live. I know it may seem counterintuitive because I think it's easy to say, okay, well, if I want to be a writer, I just have to sit at home and write all the time. Well, no, you have to, you have to go out and live your life and be a full person and really embrace the world and bring that home to your work.
Absolutely. I mean, you need to know how flowers smell, how, water moves. Being observant of the world as well helps a lot with how well you can describe it, I think, in your writing too. Um, so I think we're just about at the end of this interview here, but is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, but thank you.
Yeah, thank
Thank you
you.
so much. And, thanks to you and thank you to all the wonderful readers and the people who have taken a chance on this book. Sana and I and the entire Monsters team, we just appreciate it tremendously. Like, really, we wouldn't be here without you guys.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you're both incredibly talented and we love it. We love this world. And thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, no, thank you.